Does the Gini coefficient predict civil war or unrest? There have been many attempts by gifted mathematicians to measure income inequality within countries as opposed to absolute national wealth. Measuring national wealth without measuring its distribution can be misleading, as many countries, which are considered quite wealthy, have dramatic asymmetries between the richest and the poorest, and vice versa. To depoliticize this short documentary, we might first ask whether such skewed distributions arise from natural forces of wealth creation and distribution among biological beings, who are all striving to create resources, and then distribute them based on some form of meritocracy. We should first mention the pivotal contributions of Vilfredo Pareto, an Italian polymath who formulated his power law probability distribution around the turn of the 20th century. Due to its complexity, the Pareto distribution, or rather principle, describes a general law of nature which correctly states that around 80% of the outcomes of a process come from 20% of its inputs. Although the Pareto principle was first formulated specifically to describe uneven distributions of wealth, it actually applies to a wide range of natural phenomena, from the number of peas in pods, to the number of offspring fathered by males. For this reason, it is often referred to as the 80-20 rule. Soon after, a second Italian bioeconomist, Corrado Gini, developed the Gini coefficient to describe income inequality within a nation or a social group. By measuring the degree of asymmetry as a coefficient, the nearer the coefficient is to 1, the more unequal the distribution becomes, relatively speaking. Relatively is the key term here, as wealth and resources, and their distribution tend to be a peculiarly local phenomenon, as one is more likely to be resentful of one's neighbors than of someone living on the other side of the world. One simpler approach to defining the Gini coefficient is to define it as half of the relative mean absolute difference in wealth distribution, which is mathematically equivalent to the definition based on the Lorenz curve. If x is a random variable such as money, with a Lorenz curve of function Lx of f, then minus x has a Lorenz curve of form Lorenz function of minus x is equal to 1 minus Lx multiplied by 1 minus f. Other than proving that wealth distributions tend to prove Pareto's principle, it is also important to note that the degree of asymmetry varies from one country to another, which tends to suggest that political will and policy also affect the extent of this asymmetry. In other words, the Gini coefficient is not merely an immutable law of nature, or a natural distribution based solely on meritocracy. We can see this well described by our World in Data map of the Gini coefficient by country in 2019. Where those more libertarian economies with more extensive socialist principles embedded, tend to have lower Gini coefficients, like Scandinavia and Canada, whereas more authoritarian or right-wing countries, such as Brazil, Russia, and the United States tend to have evolved higher Gini coefficients. This should not, of course, be confused with absolute national wealth, which is an altogether different picture. So far, so descriptive. But what does this tell us about social stability, a phenomenon that can be measured in terms of civil unrest, or even civil war? Well, as the Gini coefficient has increased in the United States in recent decades, so have recent civil unrest and uprisings, culminating in the infamous storming of the Capitol. If we accept this as an inalienable truth, can it be predicted mathematically? Put into other words, at what threshold of the Gini coefficient is the likelihood of major civil unrest, or civil war triggered? If we use Latin America as a case study, then we can track the historical Gini coefficients, from 1981 to 2016, for a number of countries, and mark incidents of major uprisings to see if any correlation is suggested. In this sample, the two nations with the persistently highest Gini coefficients, Brazil and Colombia, have by far the highest number of uprisings over this 35-year period. The country with the lowest Gini coefficient, Uruguay, seems to have had no major unrest during this era, while the two countries with high Gini coefficients in the 1980s, Chile and Nicaragua, have transitioned from major unrest and civil war to relative peace as their Gini coefficients have fallen. Note also, that all incidents of unrest and civil war occurred when the Gini coefficient was above 0.5, suggesting that this may be the magic marker of trouble brewing. While this is only a subset of the world's nations, this exercise does seem to have established a hypothesis that only more rigorous analysis can test. Thank you for listening. Please feel at liberty to debate in the comment section below.